Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're immersing ourselves in a case that sits right at the turbulent intersection of complex scientific thought and criminal law.
It's a fascinating one.
Our focus is Dr. Chen Jingyuan, a brilliant scholar with a PhD in physics, specializing in, well, nonlinear complex systems.
And he had a long career in some pretty advanced fields: AI, adaptive optics for astronomy, even defense systems.
Exactly. But then he returns home to Yunnan to work as an independent scholar.
And that scholarly life is just abruptly halted. He was arrested, convicted, and imprisoned for what seems like an almost absurd crime: forwarding a handful of posts on a foreign social media platform.
And the charge specifically was picking quarrels and provoking trouble, or PQPT,
Right.
a charge that's become, notorious for its flexibility. It's so broad, so elastic, especially when it's pointed at something someone says online.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We're going to use Dr. Chen's own legal and scientific defense, which is all documented in this prison blood letter.
An incredible document.
It is, and we'll use that alongside legal critiques to really test the judicial process. We need to figure out if the conviction actually met the basic legal requirements, specifically the three essential components that have to be proven for an online PQPT crime to, hold up.
Before we even get into the legal framework, we have to talk about the initial absurdity here.
Mm-hmm.
The sources all detail the alleged crime, and they point out this shocking fact. Dr. Chen's account had fewer than 100 followers.
Fewer than 100 and near zero engagement.
Near zero. So we were talking about a major criminal conviction, a prison sentence, for a handful of posts that had basically no real-world impact. So why was this labeled a major criminal case that caused serious public disorder?
That disconnect, that's the whole thing. The gap between the action and the supposed consequence is precisely where the legal logic just starts to fall apart. And it's why his defense is so powerful.
So let's get into the specifics of the case.
Dr. Chen, born in 1976, was highly educated, obviously. His whole life revolved around rigorous analysis. And the alleged activity, it took place over 3 years between 2019 and 2022.
And the legal response was anything but light.
Far from it. He was arrested in September 2022. He was sentenced pretty quickly, by April 2023, by the Kunming Xishan District People's Court.
And the sentence was?
1 year and 8 months. 20 months in prison.
Wow.
And what's even more alarming, his appeal was just summarily rejected. No open hearing. They call it Bukaichin Shenli.
So they just reviewed the paperwork and said, nope, we're sticking with the original ruling.
That's it. The Kunming Intermediate People's Court just sustained the verdict.
Okay, so we need to establish the ground rules. When the state brings a PQPT charge for online speech, what are the non-negotiable elements they have to prove?
Right. According to Article 293 and the judicial interpretations, they have to prove all four, and they all have to connect.
All four.
First is the objective act, spreading fabricated or false information. Second, and this is maybe the trickiest, is subjective intent. The person must have known the information was false.
Known, not just suspected.
Known. Third is the required result. The act has to cause serious disruption of public order. And fourth, legal cause. You have to show a clear link between that act and that serious disruption.
In Dr. Chen's defense, it went after the three main ones.
Systematically, he targeted falsehood, knowing intent, and serious disruption, arguing the prosecution failed to prove any of them.
So let's unpack this intellectual counterattack. He didn't just deny the charges. He used a logical framework to deconstruct the whole case. Let's start with challenge one, the objective act, the false information.
Okay, so the prosecution claimed his forwarded images and posts were virtual information that insulted the political system and leadership.
Standard stuff for this kind of charge.
Right. But this is where his academic discipline just shines. Dr. Chen argued that for content to be legally false, it has to be falsifiable. It must be a statement of objective fact that you can actually check and prove is untrue.
Okay, that makes sense.
So he categorized all the state's evidence into 4 groups, and he argued that 3 of those groups are, fundamentally immune to being labeled legal rumors.
What were those 3 categories that couldn't be rumors?
First, artistic works. This included things like satirical images or a specific political cartoon called The Umbrella Girl.
Right.
His argument was that art is symbolic, it's fiction, it's metaphor, it doesn't make an objective claim about reality. So if you charge a painting with being false, you're completely misunderstanding what art even is.
You can't put a metaphor on trial.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Second category, subjective emotional expression. For example, comments on his private account where he's expressing anxiety about economic forecasts, things like that.
Yeah.
He correctly pointed out that feelings or subjective opinions, I feel X, a court can't certify that as objectively true or false.
And the third category was academic.
Precisely. Theoretical or academic articles. These were posts discussing different political spectrums or critiquing ideological concepts. He argued these are matters for academic debate, for discussion, not for a judicial verdict of truth.
So the core principle is, if it isn't a provable factual claim, like, the sky is green, it can't be legally false.
That's it. The fundamental error was treating an opinion or a piece of art or a theory as if it were a statement of objective fact that a judge could rule on.
Which is a huge leap.
The massive one. And that brings us to challenge 2, which is maybe even more complex. Subjective intent. Did he know the information was false?
Right.
This is maybe the most shocking part of the legal logic. The judge basically stated that because Dr. Chen possesses a high level of education and knowledge, he should have the ability to discern right from wrong.
Wait, hold on.
And therefore, he must have known the content was false.
So they weaponized his intelligence against him. His critical thinking became proof of guilt. That's a truly disturbing inversion of legal principle.
It is. And Dr. Chen's rebuttal here was a masterclass in philosophical defense. He countered this with a 2-part response. First, a philosophical denial.
Okay.
He said his professional cognitive structure is based on scientific skepticism. He deals in doubt, not certainty. He invoked philosophers like Hume to argue that in our complex socio-political world, nobody, especially a scientific mind trained in uncertainty, possesses absolute knowledge of truth or falsehood. He only possessed doubt and a desire to study the material.
That reframes the entire idea of knowing. You can't accuse someone of malice if their whole job is to question things. What was the second part of his intent defense?
He completely turned the tables. He used his expertise as an anti-mens rea argument. He said his deep knowledge of complex systems meant he knew the content was harmless.
So his intelligence proved his innocence, not his guilt.
Exactly. He argued his real intention was research and study driven by curiosity, not malice aimed at causing chaos. He called the judicial logic using his high education as proof of guilt absurd and a systemic betrayal of the scientific spirit.
This is just incredible. So this takes us to the third challenge, the element of harm or result. If he's already dismantled the claims of falsehood and intent, how on earth did the prosecution make the serious disruption charge stick?
Well, this is the most unique part of the case. He applied his PhD in complex systems theory directly to the legal problem. He used a concept called self-organized criticality, or SOC.
Okay, let's make sure we explain that clearly for everyone. What is SOC and how did he apply it to his Twitter account?
So SOC is a theory that describes how big, complex systems, like a sand pile or maybe a society, organize themselves to a critical state where one tiny disturbance could trigger a system-wide crash, an avalanche.
An avalanche, I get it.
But Dr. Chen argued his own profile was a low-connectivity edge node in a huge, robust social network.
So he was basically arguing my profile was a single tiny grain of sand, and the system was way too stable for me to start a catastrophic avalanche.
Precisely. His individual low-engagement post just didn't have the systemic energy to trigger that dynamic avalanche mechanism that would be serious chaos. He used physics to show his actions were too weak to matter.
Legally.
Legally, the judicial interpretation of serious disruption demands real, observable, large-scale consequences. Mass gatherings, widespread panic, something you can actually point to. The prosecution had no evidence of any of that happening.
But the undeniable evidence of this failure came after his conviction. The sources call it the natural experiment.
Correct. After he was released, Dr. Chen confirmed that the criminal evidence, the exact posts that got him convicted, were still online. They were unbanned, unheeded.
So they were still there for anyone to see.
And he concluded this proved, factually, observationally, that the judicial claim of severe harm was a completely fabricated legal fiction. If those posts were truly so dangerous, they would have been scrubbed from the internet immediately. The fact they remained untouched just shows the claim of harm was baseless.
That is just devastating evidence. It proves the massive gap between the legal claim and the actual physical reality. Okay, let's shift focus now from the crime itself to the legal process. The principles. What procedural irregularities did he complain about?
The procedural flaws were, well, they were rampant. It suggests the system was just determined to get a conviction, regardless of the evidence. He said the investigation began with a zero-evidence strategy.
First arrest, then find the evidence.
First arrest, then fabricate evidence was the quote. He also detailed alleged illegal methods like threats and abuse used to get passwords and access his private devices.
And the appeal process was fundamentally broken, denying him his day in court.
Absolutely. The refusal to hold an open hearing, citing that the imprisoned defendant failed to submit new evidence, was a huge deal.
How can you submit new evidence from prison?
Exactly. By demanding that, the court effectively reversed the burden of proof onto Dr. Chen. And that's a fundamental violation of the principle that the state has to prove guilt. Innocent until proven guilty. It was basically a procedural refusal to even engage with his defense.
This case touches on some really deep philosophical stakes, far beyond just one legal proceeding. The sources draw these powerful historical analogies, pointing to the punishment of thought itself.
Yeah, if you connect this to the bigger picture, the critique immediately draws comparisons to, well, historical persecutions of intellect. There's a very clear echo of Galileo and Giordano Bruno.
The scientists who challenged the state.
The sources suggest the judge was trying to punish thought and observation, not a crime, just as those figures were persecuted for conclusions that contradicted official doctrine. The fear was a citizen observing the system critically, much like authorities once feared Galileo's telescope.
And the philosophical critique rooted in Einstein is just as powerful.
It speaks to the dignity of reason. The critique sees the case as a challenge to the dignity of reason and a victory for blind obedience to authority, because the system treated his intellect, his high education, as the proof of his bad intent, not a safeguard against ignorance.
It's circular logic.
It is. When logic itself is criminalized, you get what Einstein warned about. Blind respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. The system punished the very capacity for independent thought.
So if we look at this briefly through the lens of international standards, what stands out?
It conflicts sharply with universal standards, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The conflicts are pretty stark. The conviction violates freedom of expression. The closed appeal violates the right to a public and fair trial. And imposing a long prison sentence for an unproven, low-impact speech act violates the crucial principle of proportionality.
So it's using a vague law to regulate thought, not to stop actual harm.
That's what it boils down to.
This has been a really profound deep dive into how logic, physics, and the law clashed in the most serious way possible. The conclusion we draw from all this material seems unequivocal. The conviction of Dr. Chen Jingwan failed to meet the standards for PQPT on all three core legal components.
Falsehood, intent, and harm.
No falsifiability, no knowing malice, and a scientific argument for the impossibility of serious disruption. And on top of that, it was characterized by these profound procedural flaws and a systematic rejection of scientific inquiry.
What's really fascinating here is that Dr. Chen, even in prison, he kept the mindset of a scholar doing research. The sources note his determination for lifelong accountability.
Right.
And his final brilliant move was to transform his own conviction documents, the indictment, the verdict, the appeal rejection, into courtroom confessions of the judicial system's own irrational behavior. He wasn't just defending himself, he was cataloging their failure.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, in terms of a broader application?
I think this case demonstrates something really important. That when power tries to define truth and enforce order by rejecting evidence and logic, the meticulous intellectual resistance of a single rational scholar, even from a prison cell, can become the most comprehensive, evidence-based critique of the system itself. His documentation of the system's illogical behavior, that's the knowledge that endures. So consider this. If the law refuses to engage with reason, maybe the only lasting defense available is the uncompromising power of objective observation and logical truth.